Before I start, let me just say this. I know it sounds cliche, but a girl on a lonely road has a breakdown, gets out of the car and sees something weird or spooky, right? But I can't help that this happened to me. All I have is this experience now, and I have to live with it. Look, cliches don't leave paws or huge jagged scratch marks down the side of your car either. Cliches don't do that. Unknown animals or monsters do. In fact, 2 years ago, I was on my way to my parents' house from my boyfriend's place. These days, we live together downtown, but at the time, our parents lived in neighboring towns in the hills above Boulder, Colorado. We'd spent the day at his parents', but since I was supposed to be spending the weekend with my family, I was making the late drive back over the hills to home. Now, if you don't know about it, Peak to Peak Highway can be a creepy place to be at night. I'm telling you now, if you're an out-of-towner, don't go there. So, you come out of town and start winding through what is basically a very windy road, even though it's built right through and around the mountains. The further you go, the less civilization there is, until you eventually end up on this lonely road, with forest on either side and no real streetlights. So there I am, driving along in my little car, singing along to the radio, when suddenly the radio cuts out, the headlights switch off, and the dashboard now goes black. It was all I could do to stop myself from having a heart attack. Why they decide to not illuminate basically the darkest part of the entire trip is well beyond me. Possibly the county didn't have the money, but I don't know. But, judging by the fact that there was literally nobody else driving the route that night, I guess there really isn't the demand. I was on a fairly straight portion of the road and was able to just kind of let her roll to a stop. If I had been on a bend, and there had been something coming the other way, it could have ended very badly, because I would not have been able to see where I was going, thinking that it must be some sort of electrical problem. I got out of the car, popped the hood. Now, I was no mechanic, but I did have a strong suspicion of what was wrong. It happened once before, and my dad had to show me what to pull and to twist to make the darn thing work again. So, might as well have brought a wrench and beat on the engine to get it to start back up. So, here I am, on my own in front of my own car. I had my cell phone, and I was using that as the only form of light I had. It was pressed between my teeth, and I hear a noise behind me. A noise I don't quite recognize. So, naturally, I freeze. I stopped what I was doing, using the phone like a searchlight, scanning all across the trees, and further up the road. I thought the sound had come from this area, but nothing. Just the darkness and a few leaves moving in the breeze. I told myself it was probably just the wind, and went back to what I was doing. After some more carefully directed pulling and twisting, putting the hood down, as I did, I caught sight of the most terrifying reflection in the windshield. A creature with deep, sunken-in yellow eyes stared out in the dark behind me. So I slammed the door, fumbled the keys into the ignition as quickly as I could. I kept turning and turning it over and over in a desperate attempt to get this thing to work. And eventually, I turned to my right, and I saw what I can only describe as a monster. It looked something like a wolf, or a dog or something, but it appeared to have the body of a man. It was staring into the window of the car, its longer snout opening, and showing its terrible, murderous teeth. I think one of the scariest memories is this didn't have teeth like a dog. They reminded me of a reptile or a shark, just out of place and jagged, and sticking out of its mouth. These teeth did not belong in the mouth of this animal. You know, people have tried to tell me it was a bear, and trust me, I seldom tell this story to anybody. But I know what a bear looks like. Bears are very distinctive looking. The head of this thing was the wrong shape. The whole thing was wrong. Okay, it wasn't a bear. It was some kind of hybrid thing. I know that's crazy, but it looked exactly like a man and a coyote or a wolf. I remember its ears very distinctly, jutting upwards on the top of its head. It looked very canine, nothing like a bear. Finally, I don't know if it was the grace of God or what, but the car burst into life, the headlights flooding, and an instant later, I was hurtling away, leaving behind whatever this animal or predator was behind me in the darkness where it belongs. Unfortunately, I'll never get this out of my head. And luckily, we do live in town now. I've never taken that highway since. But that does not take back the countless nightmares I've had of this predator that walks around in the woods at night. And I thought monsters weren't real. And I thought horror stories and horror movies were not based on reality. But this whole thing has made me reevaluate my life. Reevaluate what we really do consider reality. I was driving home from a work event late one night when this huge storm hit. I was out on a small back road, still 20 miles outside of the city. It was pitch black out there, and at this time of night, there was almost zero traffic. The rain was bad enough that I could not see, but then the hell began, and I knew I needed to get somewhere safe. If it were just the rain, I probably could have parked on the side of the road and waited it out, but there was lightning and terrible wind. I was worried about a tree falling on the car with me in it, or getting washed into a ditch upside down. And my dad was an EMT, and I'd heard lots of horror stories. He made sure I knew how to keep myself safe in any sort of emergency situation. I had a flashlight in my glove box, and I slowed down, looked around outside, trying to spot shelter of any kind. I saw what looked like a barn set back in the woods, just up the road. I decided to try and wait it out, get the storm out of the way. I parked the car, leaving the flashers on so nobody would hit it, then ran for the barn. When I got there, I realized it was not a barn at all, but actually an old abandoned house. It was in rough shape, but it was mostly dry, and the shelter from any storm would have been suffice. Besides, it was in a clearing and made of wood, so it was probably pretty fail-safe from lightning, right? The door was locked, but the window was broken, so I climbed through. There didn't appear to be any glass. I wasn't worried about getting cut. I found a dry spot in a closed stairwell, away from the windows, and sat and waited for the storm to pass. I understand you probably think it's strange that I went out of my way to do this, but I guess maybe you'll understand once I get to the end of the story. I didn't want to be stuck in the creepy house all night. And finally, the wind had died down, and I hadn't seen lightning or had heard thunder in quite a while, so I assumed the worst had passed. I looked outside, and it still appeared to be raining, but not quite as hard as it was. I climbed back out the window, made a run for my car. I was sliding around in the mud and had to keep my eyes on the ground. When I get close to my car, I skidded to a stop, nearly falling. A human figure was standing at my car, by the driver's side, looking in. I could only see the dark shape, but no real discernible details. Between the dark and steady rain, I could not see more than a few feet. After my heart had stopped pounding, I realized that it was probably another concerned driver, or maybe even a police officer. I took a few steps closer, yelling hello, but there was no answer. The shape in my car shifted, and then walked around behind my car. It moved oddly, hunched over, and walking with a bizarre cadence. I still could not see much. I remembered my flashlight, lifting it, pointing the beam at the shape. I can now see this creature clearly, and I lost it. It was a monster, not a human at all. I'd only had a glimpse of this furry face and long teeth before it ran on 2 feet, out of the path of my flashlight. It ran into the woods when my light hit it, so I ran towards my car, fumbling with my keys. I made a wide circle around the car, keeping my eyes on where it had to run to. I was nearly panicking, desperate to get into my car and get out of there. I dropped my keys again, and my hands were so wet. But on the next try, I was successful in opening the car, diving inside and slamming the door shut, locking on the doors. I looked around, making sure this thing that I saw wasn't near, and I pulled out of there as quickly as I could. But that's not all of it. The rain was still coming down very hard, and it forced me to go slower than I wanted to. It was good though, because when something jumped out in front of my car, I would just slide into it. Despite only going about 30 miles an hour, my brakes had skid on the wet road. I put the car in park, jumped out, convinced I'd actually hit something. I ran to the front of the car and looked down. There was nothing there, but in the headlights, I could see a smear of blood. A thick tuft of fur stuck in the grill of my car. My stomach dropping, and I ran back inside the car. As I pulled away a second time, I saw something shining at me, coming from the trees. As I pulled away a second time, I saw something shining at me, coming from the trees. A pair of eyes, glowing eyes, set in a dog-like face. It was the monster I'd just seen, a canine creature running on 2 legs, and I guess I'd hit it with the car. I was so scared I couldn't process it all, and peeled out of there, no longer caring about the rain or what I could have done in my car. By some miracle, I had made it home alive. The next day, when I went out to look at my car, there was an actual dent on the hood, and fur, and the blood on the grill and bumper. I called my father over. When he saw the damage, he'd asked if I'd hit a bear, and I told him no. So I tried to describe the thing that I had hit. He insisted that it was dark and raining hard, and that I'd hit a bear, and just could not see it well. But I'll never forget those glowing eyes, or the sharp teeth in the weirdly human dog face.